Hello. Hi, everyone. Good evening. So nice to see everyone.
Hello.
Hi. So it's really such a pleasure for us to meet again for a live salon. And tonight we're proud to have with us Associate Curator Efrat Assaf-Shapira from our Jewish Art and Life Wing. For those of you who have not met Efrat yet, Efrat specializes in Jewish dress and Jewish life cycle, and was involved in a number of fascinating exhibitions from our exceptional collection of Jewish costumes. Amongst them, you may have seen our exhibition Veiled Meanings, which traveled to the Jewish Museum in New York and the CJM in San Francisco a couple of years ago. The Israel Museum collection of Jewish costumes is one of the most comprehensive, unique collections of traditional dress in the world. And I'm not sure many of you know, but it includes over 10,000 fascinating items of Jewish clothing. So we're really happy to expose just a little bit of it tonight or today. Efrat will explore some of these garments that some of their hidden and symbolic meanings, and discuss their contribution to good health and longevity and prosperity. All these magical characteristics that are so relevant and appropriate for these turbulent times. Tonight is our 8th live salon. Before we begin, I want to take advantage of the opportunity to say a few thank yous. Many thanks go to the staff of the museum, of course, too many to mention each and every one by name. We're constantly at work making this and other special activities possible. Thanks to Daisy Rakach-Jivre, our Chief Curator of the Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel Wing for Jewish Art and Life. A special thank you goes to Anna Barber, Senior Editor of English Publications in our Publications Department, for her help and care with the translations made for today's salon. Thanks to Mickey Jolson and Liat Ben-Zgida for the efficient production. To Director of International Relations, Rachel Shaul, and of course to Efrat Assaf-Shapira, who has created for us this wonderful presentation. Thank you, Efrat. And to all of you, keep in touch and stay connected with our rich and exciting program. Next on our calendar, on June 25, the head of the Shrine of the Book, Curator Adolfo Reutemann, will be talking about the journey from Qumran to Jerusalem and the significance of the Dead Sea Scrolls for Judaism and Christianity. Coming back to our ceremonial dress, I want to urge every one of you again to write your questions during Efrat's presentation using the chat box, or live and directly to the microphone when we open the microphones at the end of the presentation. We are, as always, curious to hear you. So without further delay, Efrat, please, the stage is yours.
Very much. Thank you very much, Ido. And I'm very glad and excited to be here tonight, virtually meeting all of you from from our gallery of Jewish costume in the Mandel Wing for Jewish Art and Life. As Ido said, our collection of Jewish costumes is very, very extensive and very, very unique and rare, because it is one of the collections of Jewish dress, but it's not only Jewish dress, because wherever Jews lived, they dressed mostly just like the surrounding society. So actually our collection is an opportunity to see world's dress from pre-modern times. Our collection, as Ido mentioned, is okay. Our collection, as Ido mentioned, was presented here at the Israel Museum in a large exhibition, which we will see in a minute. And later on, it traveled to New York and to San Francisco. And here's the exhibition from the Israel Museum. And as some of you have have seen also the exhibition in the Jewish Museum in New York and at San Francisco Contemporary Jewish Museum. So as you can understand, I think that dress is one of the most important things in life. And even now in these very confusing and complex times, I was curious about clothes. What do people wear during the coronavirus? What are the dress codes that are being invented or used? For example, how do people go to the supermarket during the coronavirus? I've seen people in onesies. How do people dress for a Zoom meeting? And also, how do people dress for ceremonial events, for weddings, bar mitzvahs, and others? On the left side of the screen, you can see the wedding of one of our colleagues from here, from the museum. And on the right, you can see actually my nephew's bar mitzvah. The dress hasn't changed, but some accessories were added during the coronavirus. Of course, the face masks and gloves. Sometimes also the setting moved from inside the synagogue to the yard of the synagogue, for example. Now, this idea of people continuing to celebrate life ceremonies and other events, even during hard and stressful times, while taking care to protect themselves and the surrounding people, actually led me to think, what did people in past generations did? How did people in traditional ceremonies in former generations used to protect their loved ones while still celebrating and going through the ceremonies? And our collection of Jewish dress includes many items which are actually ceremonial dress for circumcisions or other afterbirth ceremonies, weddings, funerals, and others. And when you look very carefully at these items, you see hidden symbols, amuletic symbols, patterns, or cuts that are actually for protecting the person who is going through a very fragile phase, because rites of passage are always considered very fragile. For example, if you look at this slide here, you see two outfits for babies from Iraq. The outfits are much inspired by the European fashion for babies at the time, but the embroidery is a traditional Iraqi embroidery, and of course we see hidden patterns which are for protecting the small babies. We see the khamsa, the hand, and the blue beads or blue color to ward off the evil eye or evil forces. Sometimes the protection is not in the motifs, but in the cut itself or the shape. For example, this is a very long dress for a newborn girl. Of course, it's much too longer than needed. And this is because it was believed in Salonika at that time that a long dress would also guarantee her a long life. We also have sometimes some very personal and moving stories about specific items of dress. For example, this dress from Yemen, Sana'a, was made for a girl in the 1930s, a little girl who became ill with smallpox, and which was another epidemic. And when she fell ill, this dress was created for her. It's an amuletic dress bearing a beautiful embroidery on the front and the back, which is asymmetrical. Asymmetric embroideries or patterns were considered as confusing the evil forces. So this is why it's asymmetric, and it also includes cowrie shells and red threads, which are symbols for fertility and vitality. This little girl healed, and the dress stayed with her throughout her childhood. Another very, very special object that we have in our collection is this little shirt or undershirt for a baby boy from Salonika. He was born after his elder siblings haven't survived their early years of life. And in order to protect him, he was made, well, he made, sorry, he was prepared a small shirt from the shrouds of his grandmother. Um, Again, the shrouds, using the shrouds is a bit to confuse the demons, so they will not think that there is a new living baby. And also, the linen itself was considered a very magical, protective, and amuletic material, especially for little children against the demoness Lilith, which was considered the most harmful demoness for children and newborn mothers, newborn children and mothers. Um, in wedding ceremonies, a lot of times we also meet very uh, nice charms for good luck and protective motifs. In the embroidery, for example, the dress in the left from Bukhara, you can see Khamsa in the center. But also there is a very, very known tradition, mostly at the Western world, which is actually also for good luck, fertility, and happiness. And this is a Victorian tradition, or maybe earlier. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, and a sixpence in the shoe. And we have a dress in our collection that was made in New York in 1947, very much related to the Victorian tradition of white wedding dresses, but it also hides or has within itself these elements. The something old is the lace. It's a Burano Italian lace from early 19th century. The new is silk, the silk of the dress itself. It's a satin silk, ivory satin silk. And, well, something borrowed she probably gave back. And the little blue ribbon that you see at the upper side of this slide is hidden in the lining. So I think it's really interesting to see that these protective traditions travel all around the world. Another interesting thing I think about this dress is that it was made in 1947. 1947 was just 2 years after World War II ended. And this is the time when the fashion industry and the world actually started to recover. There was a revival. And I think we can also see this revival in this dress with its very luxurious textiles and full skirt. And I think it's an optimistic time, and I hope we will have we will have optimistic times or good times in our close future. Weddings during times of plague and epidemic, as we've seen, are always taking place. But I want to tell you now about a very special and interesting tradition relating to weddings during plagues. And this is the tradition of a plague wedding or a black wedding. It's a tradition probably originating in Eastern Europe. And it says that in Jewish communities, it's a Jewish tradition, when there is a time of plague or an epidemic, the community should take an orphan girl and an orphan boy and wed them in the cemetery under a black chuppah, a black canopy, and wearing black wedding clothes. We know of black weddings taking place in Europe, America, Israel during the 19th and 20th centuries. And recently it has also been discussed in several papers and talks. But we have an example here of one wedding which was photographed. This wedding was photographed, a plague wedding, in 1909 here in Jerusalem by the photographers of the American colony. And if you look at the lower right side of the slide, you will see the black chuppah, the black canopy. Now, very, very interestingly, this plague wedding, it takes place in the cemetery in the Mount of Olives. And you can see one of the tombs there. Very, very interestingly, this wedding appears in another photograph. The other photographs, together with this one, were both presented in a talk given by Nirit Shalev Khalifa from the Ben Tzvi Institute, where she talks about weddings as general, but also about this plague wedding, and she also gives some more information. It's in Hebrew for those of you who wish to see. I was telling my family one dinner at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis about this tradition and wondering about it, thinking, would there be any plague weddings during the corona? And then about 2 days later, another contemporary, sorry, I'll just take a drink and you can read the wonderful translation that Anna did on the right. Another contemporary way to fight the coronavirus, in a way, is found in this poster from Jerusalem. And it says that actually in order to stop the corona, the thing you have to do is dress modest. It actually, this idea of dressing modest in order to bring redemption is something that we know of, and unfortunately, many times women were accused that their immodest dress brought all kinds of tragedies and bad things. Also, if the women will dress modestly, it will also help thousands of religious boys tending towards sin. Now, this idea that if a woman dresses modestly and veils herself, it is something that creates a change for the better, is also something that appears in Noam Bar'am's Ben Yosef exhibition at the Israel Museum. It opened last year, and it's an exhibition talking about veiled women of the Holy Land. And she shows in this exhibition, which I'm sure some of you have seen, this phenomenon of women over veiling themselves for different reasons, but related to the Jewish women veiling themselves, which you can see in the slide here. They believe that if they will veil themselves and cover themselves and take upon themselves this idea of dressing very, very modestly, they will bring change, both in the national communal realm, and also in the personal realm if someone is sick or other personal reasons. Now, we see that many times, as Noam says, in times of distress, in hard times, this idea of dressing modest comes back. And Noam also says that this phenomenon of the Jewish veiled women actually gained a lot of popularity in the year 2000, in the second Intifada, when there was a lot of terror attacks and buses who were bombed, also in the ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods of Jerusalem. And one of the women who wore a shawl was saved in such an attack, and only her shawl was damaged. So you can understand that following this, the popularity of wearing a shawl as something that's redeeming and helping and protecting gained more popularity. Now, the women who wear shawls or veils today also relate to the fact that they feel protected when wearing the shawl. And they also relate to the dress of the biblical mothers or former women in former generations and country as their icons, as the women that they follow. And interestingly enough, we have in our collection a collection of different veils worn by Jewish women, mainly in Central Asia. Now, the idea of women who veil themselves is something very ancient. We know it from this area and the Mediterranean, Central Asia from ancient times. And it was considered something related to a high status of a woman. Honorable women veiled themselves. Women who were protected by a man, a family, they veiled themselves. Other women, servants, prostitutes, they were forbidden to veil themselves. So this was really something honorable to considered honorable to veil oneself. And in Islamic times, the veiling of the women became something very, very characteristic of Islamic dress. And also Jewish women in Islamic countries dressed the same as when they went out to the street. And so they could feel protected, so they could feel that the walls of their house keep going with them even when they are in the street. Until now, we talked about protecting oneself in times of fragility, in times of distress, in times of plagues. But there are also other kinds of times of distress. For example, times of austerity, times when there is shortage in material or shortage in money. These two dresses that you see before you, although they look very torn and in desperate need of shimur, preservation, sorry, restoration and preservation, which they will very soon go through. They're actually a miracle, because these two dresses were made in early 20th century in one of the first Zionist settlements here in this land. When we did the exhibition on Israeli fashion 2 years ago, we really desperately looked for items such as this with no success. And then a few months ago, a visitor to the museum approached us, and she asked us if we would be interested in items from Sejera, one of these first moshavot. And I have to tell you, I nearly fainted, because this is something so unbelievable to receive to our collection. And also, she told us the story of these two dresses. They were made by her grandmother, who you can see in the picture with the two braids, wearing the dress, one of the dresses. And the times were times of shortage. And she really wanted to create something festive for herself. So she used the sacks of sugar. And from that, she sewed the dress. And also interesting to see the embroidery, which is a very interesting combination of Palestinian and Russian traditional motifs. Of course, using objects, textiles in secondary use to create festive clothes is something, or other clothes, is something that we know from worldwide. And very famous, of course, is the green curtain dress of Scarlett O'Hara. When we talk on the subject of creativity in times of shortage, I think it's very interesting to talk also about one of Israel's most iconic fashion items, which is that desert coat. The desert coat was first designed in 1955 by Finny Leitersdorf, one of the pilgriming and most prominent Israeli fashion designers. She designed it for Mesquite, the famous brand that was established by Rodayan in 1954 and became like a synonym for Israeli fashion all around the world. Now, the creations of Mesquite, the creations of Fini, were highly influenced by this land, by the colors, by the shapes, and so is the desert coat. It was influenced by the colors of the desert and by the shape of the Bedouin tents, but also it was influenced by the economic situation at Israel at the time. Fine materials were scarce. It's the times of austerity, 1950s. And she used local wool, unprocessed local wool, to weave the fabric of this coat. At the early years, she refused to add lining to it, retaining truth to the material. So it was also a bit itchy, but nevertheless iconic. Another very moving example, I think, that we have in our collection of clothes made in times of shortage is this set of baby boys' clothes made in the Netherlands in 1945. Right after World War II. These clothes belong to a family from the Netherlands who survived the Holocaust. They kept living in their house and they survived the Holocaust. And one of the family members, Hannah Dotan, donated us many items, many childhood items from this family. And when she told us the story of these items, I was really, really moved. Because following the war, right after the war, in 1945, a new baby was born to this family, Hannah's little brother. His name was Shlomo. And when he was born, the family wanted to create new clothes for him. But there weren't any materials, as we heard before. There was shortage in materials during World War II, in materials and in fabrics. And so they did create new clothes for him, but from old clothes. If you see on the right, the little shirt is from a man's undershirt, and the objects on the left are from linen and from towels. So I think even very stressful times can bring a lot of creativity and wish for a new life, new times. Until now, we mainly saw objects of clothing worn during the distressed times. But what happens when the hard times um, are past, are gone, are ending, hopefully very soon for us too? How do the clothes keep on reminding us of these hard times, and do they? And actually, in our collection, we have a few items that relate to hard times a long time after these hard times have passed. For example, this groom's outfit from Tetuan, Morocco. It's a black coat worn during the wedding ceremony. And according to the Moroccan tradition, it is said that the groom wears a black coat to commemorate the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. But although this tradition is very, very, I think, serious and interesting, and actually it connects the community in contemporary times to a very old time in the past, a tragedy that happened in the past. Actually, the reason for the wearing of black among North African communities was originally different. Actually, it was a decree. Uh, a decree. Uh, they were made to wear black clothes in order to differentiate themselves from the Muslims. And decrees differentiating Jews are known to us from very, very early times, from the 8th century Pact of Omar in the Muslim world. Jews were made to wear different badges, different colors of clothing, different shoes. And of course, in the 20th century, we usually remember the yellow star from the Nazi times. But I find it really, really interesting that a community chooses to give a new interpretation to a decree, to something that was uh, not their idea at all, that was forced on them. And the interesting thing really is also that after this decree stopped in the middle 19th century, the Jews in North Africa continued to wear black or black hams, commemorating the temple, commemorating a tragedy of the past. Fashion as expressing tragedies is something that is also apparent in this collection you see here. It's a collection made by Rogi Ben Yosef, another prominent fashion designer who worked here in Israel. She usually created very, very colorful objects, very, very colorful items of dress, as you can see on the right. And then at a certain stage, at the end of the 60s, early 70s, she starts to create in black and white colors. This is a collection inspired by the Talit. These are very, very hard times in Israel. It's the war of attrition. Every day pictures of killed soldiers wrapped in talitot are shown. And she decides to create something that will express these very, very hard times of the Israeli reality. Tziona Shimshi designed the textile, and it was inspired, as I said, by the talit, by the prayer shawl. And I think when she did this, she combines both a very tragic time in the Israeli society, very sad times, together with maybe the most traditional item of clothing in Jewish tradition, the talit. And she combines it with fashion, showing how fashion can express the feeling of the time. Before we end, and not to leave on such a sad note, I chose to bring you two very, very colorful Bukharan coats made in the ikat technique. The ikat technique of dyeing and weaving was considered a Jewish craft in Bukhara until early 20th century. The Jews really brought this craft to a very, very high standard and marvelous craft. But originally it was the dyeing was given to dye fabrics was given to the Jews to humiliate them. It was a craft that was looked down upon because it involves very, very strong smells, and it stains the hands. So it was like something humiliating. But little by little, the Jews raised this craft to such a marvelous, honorable creation that it also gained them a very, very honorable place in the society. We've talked now about different aspects of dress in times of distress. Some of these items stayed with us for generations. Some we were not remembered. But there is always the wish to protect our loved ones, us and our loved ones, in these times of distress. And when I'm looking now at the different new accessories that we have for the corona, such as these face masks, that I have one also, matching my dress, of course, I keep wondering what will stay with us after the coronavirus ends. What will we take with us for further generations? Will we forget everything? Will we change the way we dress? Will we combine something inside our apparel? Well, times will tell. And I wish you all stay safe and healthy. And many thanks for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Efrat. This is beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I was so excited I forgot my English sometimes.
Yeah. So the floor is now open for questions. You can write them in the chat box or just open your microphone and ask freely, please.
Unmute us. Should I say something?
Yeah. So we want to thank you.
Well, this is George Hiltzik, and I want to thank you for this wonderful presentation, and thank you with an uplifting spirit.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, look, we have America in this.
Yeah.
I have a question. You don't think it's funny?
I can't hear. Sorry.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm Marcia from Brazil.
Yeah.
Thank to you. Thank you so much. It was great listening. A pity it's over, but next time we'll do more and more and more of it, right? I had a question. Remember the photo of the event at in the cemetery, not of the wedding. Yes, the wedding, when you mentioned the two orphans.
Yeah.
And you say at the Mount Olive.
Yeah.
Right. It's also, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but I always heard the reference to cemetery in Hebrew as Beit Chaim.
Yeah.
And I'm from Ashkenazi origin.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Always refer to cemetery.
Marcia, we lost you for a minute. Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. My question is if the tradition, in inverted commas, right, that was shown in that, the scene in that cemetery has to do with the vocabulary that we use, Beit Chaim, for cemeteries.
I'm not sure. I have an answer, but we do know that in the Jewish tradition throughout the ages, there are very, very complex relations between the living and the dead. And for example, there are some texts that relate to the idea that the dead really liked to be visited. And we know that the cemetery is a place where there is a lot of life. I would suggest for further reading on this subject, Professor Avriel Bar-Levav wrote a lot about the in the Jewish tradition, and maybe through his writings you can find more answers. But I can tell you from what we have here in the life cycle exhibition, for example, in the permanent exhibition here at the Israel Museum, that this dialogue between life and death is something that constantly happens in Jewish culture. For example, when I showed you the groom's outfit with the black coat, underneath the coat or the wedding dress in Moroccan Jewry, the bride and the groom wear shrouds. So maybe it's to mix up the evil forces, maybe it's to commemorate the temple, maybe as a memento mori, but it's like something that's really, really interlaced, I think, in the Jewish tradition. So I don't know about the name, if it's related, but maybe. And maybe we have like games of opposites. You know, the tractate that deals with death is called tractate of smachot, of happiness, and not of death. So maybe Beit Chaim is in a way something like that, but I'm not sure. Okay.
Thank you. Toda rabba.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Marcia. Just a small remark, I put in the chat box for you a link to Professor Avriel Bar-Levav's writings from the Google Scholar, if you want to see some of his books and do some further reading or research.
Thank you. I have another, if nobody is going to ask. I was very interested in how the maintenance of all these artifacts. I know it's very difficult. These artifacts, I'm really surprised how you go on with the maintenance.
Well, it's a hard work, and every object that enters the museum goes through a restorative check. And if we decide that a certain item of clothing needs restoration, for example, the dresses that are behind me, all of them went one restoration or the other before we present them in the galleries. Sometimes restoration can take a few years. Sometimes we have objects that don't need restoration. And we also have very, very rare objects that we will not display because they are so fragile. And we're afraid that if we'll display, they will cease to be. So we also store them according to different rules of restoration, temperature, way of folding or hanging or rolling. It depends, light, and etc. Yeah.
I have a question, if I can go ahead.
Please.
Yeah.
I'm looking at what you're wearing, and I'm wondering if you could tell us if there's any designer up to date that's using inspiration from, what you showed us, and, what does it look like today?
I think there is a lot of, from my small experience, I think that even today, as always, there is always inspiration from all kinds of things. And also there is, I think, a lot of inspiration from traditional clothing, from events around us, from world crises such as the current corona, but also global warming and other things. And you can see that inspiration is everywhere. And especially today when the world is so global and small, I think that fashion designers take inspirations from many, many, many things. Sometimes it's something very local, or even, something out of their window. And sometimes it's something from Japan, because that's something that they saw on Instagram or something else. So, it varies and it depends. And yeah, and we also, just to add a little thing, we find it very, very important that schools of fashion design in Israel, both Betzalel School and Shenkar, come to us and see our collections. We had wonderful collaborations both with Shenkar and with Betzalel fashion department when the students were influenced by our objects. Just recently we had a project with Betzalel when they had to prepare costumes for the East-West Ensemble, Jerusalem music ensemble. So these are really, really interesting things that happen.
Right.
And I also think it's our duty to, it's like a continuation of tradition in new ways. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm the chair of Betzalel in San Francisco, so you said the right thing.
What?
I'm the chair for Betzalel. I'm volunteering to help them, so you said the right thing.
So good luck.
Thank you.
Okay.
I would like to pose a question, or I actually put a few questions in the chat. My name is Deborah Landis. I'm a professor at UCLA, and I run the David C. Copley Center for Costume Design. And my questions in the chat, I have many questions in the chat, actually. I'll just run them off really quickly. So first of all, is the museum still collecting? Are there major international private collections that you speak to or talk to? And then do you tour your collection or parts of your collection? And a couple of other questions. Do you have an available online catalog of your textile and costume collections? And then finally, the last question is, do you, I guess you know that this is my subject area, do you collect current Israeli fashion designers and Jewish costume designers then worldwide? And if you can keep track of all those questions, they're all in the chat. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it.
I thank you very much. I actually love your questions, but I can't remember them all. So
I'll help you. I'll help you.
Okay, first one was if we still collect. Yes,
Exactly.
we still collect objects related to Jewish dress, but what we collect in our wing for Jewish art and life are mainly costumes and dress related to Jewish identity or in the past and in the present. And we collect clothes that reflect identity of groups or of times. So this will also answer your question about the fashion. In our wing, we do not collect contemporary fashion or even fashion of past years, which is an unicum, which is something individual. Only things that are related to a more large phenomenon or group, and this could be contemporary and this could be of the past. Yes, we tour our collection. We have this collection, as was talked about in the beginning of this presentation, was shown in New York and in San Francisco in 2017, 2018. And actually, yesterday, there is this blog you might know, 99% Invisible, a very famous, I think, fashion blog, or a blog that also, there was a session about fashion. And they talked about our collection in the Contemporary Jewish Museum just yesterday. It was a surprise. So it's very interesting to see, always it's very interesting to see our collection abroad and the opinions it gets, the interaction. So yes, we tour. What else? There were others, I think.
Yeah. First of all, I put 2 links in the chat. One to the place in our website for the dress codes exhibition, which was our version for Veiled Meanings, and also for Fashion Statements, which is a later fashion exhibition that was on at the museum a couple of years ago, and which dealt not really with our collection, but through it you could see a lot of the evolution of these motifs and ideas in traditional dress, how they evolved into Israeli fashion. Going back to the questions, Efrat, I think, are there major international private collections? This is what Deborah is asking.
Yeah.
And does the museum tour the collection? I think you've related to that. And do we have an online catalog of our textile and costume collection?
Okay.
And, so Daisy, who is the chief curator of the wing, is showing actually. Maybe we can switch to Daisy's camera, and we can. Daisy is showing the catalog in front of the camera. Dima, if you can. There we go. Okay.
Daisy, we can't hear you.
Yeah.
We can't hear. Yeah. Okay. Daisy is showing our marvelous catalog, The Jewish Wardrobe. In 2012, it was published in English, 2014 in Hebrew, edited by Dr. Esther Yohas.
Is also showing the catalog.
Yeah. Who? Oh, good. Edited by Dr. Esther Yohas and co-edited by Noam Bar'am Ben Yosef. And it's a huge catalog of some of the highlights of our 10,000 collection. So of course it's not everything, In the museum's website, there are some of the collection is online, and also, as Ito mentioned, also some of the exhibitions, and you can tour them. About being in touch with major collections worldwide, I'm very glad to be part of the International ICOM Costume Committee Board. And this, well, being part of ICOM Costume enables us to be in touch with many collections, museums, and professionals around the world, and also to, of course, to be in touch with such collections worldwide. And we're always glad to learn about new collections, which we still haven't been in touch with or know. So thank you very much for all your questions.
Thank you so much.
Gender-related questions that I want to sort of merge for you, Efrat. Deborah was asking, did men's fashion also contain symbolic designs? And then there's another question, which from Judy Rydell, did more men die in past pandemics with women protected with veiled masks? So maybe we can put these two together and see if you have that.
It's I think symbolic motifs, amuletic motifs appear both in women's and in men's clothing. Of course, we will see in some times which are events which are related to women, like motherhood, we will see special cases of amulets and amuletical motifs. But in our collection, which is something that has to do with the characteristics of our collection, although so huge, 10,000 items of dress, is mostly women's dress and less men's dress, and it's also mostly of Jews living in Eastern and Muslim countries. This has to do with the collection policy, but also with the reality of past generations. Men changed their clothes to more modern, if you can say global, mode of dress earlier than women. And so we have less men's traditional clothes, and also we have less European items of worn items of dress worn by Jews, also because of the Holocaust. So, and the reason that we have mostly ceremonial dress is also because this collection was mainly built by people who came to Israel from all around the world. And when you immigrate from one place to the other, you mostly take your ceremonial dress, and also your everyday dress is, you know, is torn, and does not remain.
I think it's also perceived as less important, and sometimes it's actually quite a pity, because some of the day-to-day dress is actually fascinating, but people tend to disregard it as important and keep only the ceremonial dress.
I agree. I think, and when we do have a chance to get something which is an everyday item of clothing, again, it's quite a miracle, and it happens very scarcely. So thank you again.
Okay. Evie is writing that in the current pandemic in the US, more men have died, but no one has published information whether men wear masks as often as women.
Oh, I couldn't hear very well. Can you?
Yeah, no, I'm saying that Evie is writing that in the current pandemic in the United States, more men have died than women, but nobody has published information on whether men wear masks as often as women.
Yeah, well, I actually, it's Evie. Evie wrote it.
I think
Uh,
so.
yeah. Hi. I was just, I was wondering about this thing that there are societies whom the women wear masks or veiled almost all the time. And I thought it would be very, very interesting to check if in these societies really women are less ill than men. And so I agree. I would love to see if there is something that we can learn from about women and men regarding to the wearing of the mask.
I imagine that these statistics will come out in a while. We still don't have that perspective, but maybe in a year's time or 2 years' time, we'll start seeing more data coming out.
Yeah.
And it will feed this research, which is, I think, quite fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. More questions? Okay. I think we can say good night. Say thank you to Efrat again.
Thank you. Thank you all for listening to me, and thank you for being with us. And also thanks to all my colleagues here at the museum. And thank you, Ido. And Shabbat Shalom, actually.
Shalom, everyone.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Bravo. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Stay safe.